Do-do-doosh, the James Bond Book Club. Today on the James Bond Book Club, Casino Royale. Today's cocktail, the Vesper. Pause here for recipe. The name's Book Club, the James Bond Book Club. We meet monthly to discuss a James Bond book over cocktails. I'm Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. As always, we're holding our meeting here in the Teresa de Vincenzo Memorial Library. There's a photo from her service there. Top left and right are framed cover pages of the first edition of Casino Royale that I ripped the front and back page off. You may also see some future titles and related artworks and artifacts. Today, it's the spy story to end all spy stories and begin Bond. Casino Royale by Ian Fleming from 1953. While there might be some dispute about the signature cocktail for future James Bond books, in Casino Royale, it's highly unlikely to be anything other than the drink invented between its pages, the Vesper. That's all alcohol. And while we're talking about certainties, there really was no question about who our first prospective member should be. A renowned San Diego area actor, writer, and director responsible for several outstanding productions at the San Diego Fringe Festival, including The Quote and We the People. He is also the architect of the How Dare You Awards and host of its sister podcast. He's also my collaborator on Space Force and my co-host on the Everything Sequel podcast. I'm finally able to talk to him about James Bond in context. Michael Shantz, welcome to the James Bond Book Club. Membership is open. Oh. A full deck.
I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. Are you a card player?
Yeah, I like cards.
Okay. Maybe you can educate me on some of the finer points of Baccarat.
Well, that's a thing, isn't it?
It's certainly a thing for me reading this book.
So, well, essentially Baccarat is just the same as blackjack, just change the numbers.
Oh, that's interesting.
Go from 21 to 9.
That's an interesting approach. It's not the case for all card games?
Yeah, maybe.
If you just change the numbers, it's a different game.
Well, and we've done so much together, and James Bond, of course, always comes up.
Right. It's a running gag on the Everything Sequel podcast.
Yeah, and obviously we're dealing with the book Casino Royale, but for lovers of the James Bond movies, there's two Casino Royales.
Three if you count the TV anthology play adaptation from 1954, only 1 year after this book was published.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
I had no idea I should count that one.
Well, you should. I mean, it's often discounted because it is an American James Bond.
Oh, wow.
If you discount nationalism, which is the heart of all of, every piece of James Bond fiction, there's actually some really good stuff in there. Peter Lorre as Le Chiffre is nothing to sniff at.
All right. Fantastic.
I
just think it's funny that the difference between the Daniel Craig movie and this book, of course, they went the No Limit Texas Hold'em in the movie. And I just imagine for American audiences' sake, they thought, let's not do the Baccarat. We're just going to confuse those poor Americans.
Yeah, we're playing to the cheap seats, but
yeah.
Let's
go for the low-hanging fruit.
But they're still in they're in Montenegro.
Yes.
There's still no reason why they should be playing.
Yeah, exactly.
They should be still playing a sophisticated European game, even if it's a sophisticated European game of poker. Just the fact that a croupier utters the word Hold'em is wrong. Well, aside from how much I enjoy talking to you about popular fiction, Mike, I thought that since we're established podcasting partners and collaborators, this would be a great way to ease both myself and the audience into the series. We're also passing the gauntlet somewhat. You are the anchorman of the Everything Sequel podcast. You're frequently surprised when I ask you a question on the show. So how do you feel? I
love those moments.
How do you feel about being the Tom Stewart of this podcast?
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm excited to be in the little sidecar.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Which it is a cocktail. I don't know if it's a cocktail that comes up in any of the books, but...
True, yeah. Certainly not this book.
No, it may be the... Yeah, well...
But this is a good cocktail.
Well, let's jump in. Let's jump into cocktails. The signature cocktail, which you will have seen in the opening credits, will have given you a recipe. Is the Vesper, which is 3 parts gin, 1 part vodka, half an ounce of vermouth, and lemon peel. So I mean, you know, I said flippantly, it is all alcohol. Apart from that slice of lemon, it's all alcohol.
Right.
How are you finding it?
I find it delicious. You know, what's funny is, I think it was back in October, I braved a dinner out with friends and saw the cocktail on the menu and thought to myself, I've never actually had the cocktail. So I got it. And I became a fan immediately.
It's interesting. I think it's...
But I also think people either love or hate gin. Oh.
Well, yeah, I mean, I gin has been one of my late life obsessions. Not to get too biographical here. I'm already... See, that's the problem with gin. It's sort of... It gets you instantly teary. But the first drink that I sneaked as a boy was Beefeater gin. And
congratulations.
Well, no, I mean, Beefeater is, I think, one of the more disgusting gins out there. It's my least favorite.
I'm just saying that's a bold move for a child. I think my first sneak was Budweiser.
Well, what's the point? I mean, if you're going to sneak, go top shelf. No, I just saw it and I instantly thought, okay, let's see what this is all about. And I've had an aversion to Beefeater gin specifically, and I thought that meant I had an aversion to gin,
completely.
The liquor. But
yeah.
You know, as I've grown older, I've learned that it's a varied and delicious spirit.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, depending on how you feel about gin, but I mean, it's certainly one of the more drunk cocktails in every sense of the word. That's been, you know, invented in a book. I mean, that's what fascinates me about it. The Casino Royale, the book that we're doing today, the drink doesn't predate Casino Royale. Fleming literally describes it in the book, and that's what we're basing it on. You'll see it referred to more often as the James Bond cocktail, but that's a Vesper.
Right, yes.
It's I can't think of many other cocktails that have been invented in fiction that are like drunk as regularly as a you said you saw it on a menu. I see it all the time.
And I want to say it was listed not properly, not as the Vesper. Maybe it said the James Bond Vesper.
Yeah.
Or maybe it had, but.
But it's sort of, I mean, and you know, within the context of the book, it's very clear that they...
I've got extra.
Yeah, I got extra too. I'm sure that will become clear as we start to try and discuss a piece of literature. But you know, it's described as a drink that you're supposed to have one of, you know, in any given day. Stop. Yeah, and also I was interested in the context of the book, and this is drink geekery, but you know, why not? Have to cut that out. Someone's calling me. Oh, I didn't realize what was linked. Well, I hope I don't get any more calls. We'll cut that out. That's AA calling me to see where
right.
My meeting was at 2.
You missed your meeting. Yeah, exactly.
So, and the bit of drink geekery is that the criticism of the drink over the years has been that you should really be stirring it, because when you shake any gin-based cocktail, it bruises the gin. But it seems that that's exactly what Fleming was trying to do with the drink.
Yeah.
Like, take an incredibly strong drink, put some air in it, make it cold, so it's more preferable to drink. So it's kind of interesting that the major criticism about it is the purpose of the drink.
Is the reason it was made that way in the first place.
Yeah. But I can't stress too much. Large slice of lemon peel. That's what it says in the book. And do not give yourself a tiny little sliver, because it's the only non-alcoholic element of the drink.
I made mine so long it fell off into 2 pieces.
as it should be, So, and then you can drink it at sea and not get scurvy.
Right. Yes.
Which again, if Fleming had a naval background, I'm sure that's what he was going for.
Eat the booze-soaked lemon peel. What are you doing that for? So I don't get scurvy.
People do like the what do you call it? The olives, the dirty gin soaked olives. So what's wrong with a slice of gin, vodka, and vermouth laced lemon peel?
If you're doing it right, you don't have the pith. You just have the zest.
I always get a bit of pith in.
Yeah.
Because I'm a pith artist. Sorry, I didn't plan that joke, but I felt obliged. So yeah, we mentioned that a running gag on Everything Sequel is my bringing the Bond movies up apropos of nothing.
Right.
And also during our Harry Potter series, you repeatedly implied that I had not read a book.
I think that was more by accident. And probably just for sport. You were actually the one who brought it up first.
So I consider this revenge, as we're doing the James Bond books, not the films. I might have the opportunity later on to say that you are talking too much about the James Bond films. So this is a big setup, if you haven't already realized, as well as a cover for day drinking. 2 questions that we always ask, as of now. This is the first episode. Have you read a James Bond book before, and was it this one?
No. And this is my first James Bond book.
Oh, tell me about that.
I found it endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
To read. So can I assume you've read all of them, or?
All the Flemings.
Right.
I mean, we'll get into this in later meetings, but the Bond canon really doesn't stop at Fleming, and in fact, it's really just the starting point.
Really?
Bond. There's a cycle of Fleming imitation novels. There's a cycle of there's young James Bond. There's people who are writing original fiction using the James Bond character. So it is interesting in that respect. So I've read everything that Fleming wrote about Bond and a few of the others, but not in a completist sense.
Right. Well, it's interesting because we all, I think, have an idea of, or certainly I did, an idea of James Bond in our heads. Mm-hmm. All of that for me is based solely on the movies. Mm-hmm. And so to see him in written form, in which you get a peek into his thoughts.
Right.
That was interesting. And of course, being written in 1953, there are some things that are problematic in this book.
I don't know what you're talking about.
There are things that make my blood run cold.
Yeah, as well it should. I think it's a good test of whether you have any morality left if if you know say, what's the big deal? I say and think those things, immediately put them in prison.
Right.
Yeah, and so I mean, would you recommend this book? Would you want to read more?
I have to admit, it's made me curious. It does make me kind of want to read more James Bond.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And would you want to, because you know primarily the movies, would you want to read the book of particular movies, or would you want to go through serially?
Probably serially.
It's made for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't, you don't have had to have read it one after the other, but it certainly, it lends itself to that. And it's very satisfying if you do it that way. It's certainly not like the movies where, you know, he ends up in the dinghy having sex and then he resets at the beginning of every movie. They don't do that in these books. He always talks about the uncomfortable situation where he has to get rid of the Bond girl.
That's why I loved that portion of the book. I loved the talk of the uncomfortable way in which you have to disentangle from the relationship.
Yeah. I mean, this is perhaps one of the more extreme ones. This and On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where you have to sort of kill them off.
That was one of my questions for you. Is that an ongoing thing throughout the books of just sort of the idea of the disentanglement, which is just a lovely word in print about how he sees what will be the end of every relationship he has.
Right. No, it is definitely a theme. Typically what happens is you get a brief paragraph at the beginning of the next novel, which sort of says like, you know, Honey Rider dumped me. She went off with some guy, or, you know, it's something like that. But they mixed it up.
Accident.
Yeah. So suicide in this one, obviously, you know, no spoilers to say his wife dies on Her Majesty's Secret Service. You know, there's instances like in Moonraker where he never gets the girl in the first place, and so it's not even an issue. So
that's interesting in and of itself.
Yeah, she turns out to be Honey Rider, meets a GI and goes off with him while they're together. I'm doing this all from memory, but I do believe that post Diamonds Are Forever, he sort of says, well, I tried living with her for a while, but it didn't work out. So she just left. So it's kind of like, you know, there's usually a different reason at the end of each novel, but they deal with it. This
book even gives explanations like, and if it's too hard to extricate myself, I'll just go on a long assignment.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'll just go to another country for some assignment so that time just sort of takes care of it for me.
It's a very formative experience. We don't hear much about it again, but it's very clear that you know, as it is in the movies, this is the kind of defining experience of his romantic life.
Right.
That kind of haunts, if not directly haunts him, is clearly there in future novels. I also wanted to ask if you had any overall thoughts about the book before we dig in chapter by chapter.
It's hard to kind of extricate myself from the movies.
Yeah.
So one of my overall thoughts as I was reading it was this written version of James Bond in this book feels like the James Bond I see in the first movie with Daniel Craig. Very deliberately, I think, yeah. Does that hold for you?
Definitely, strong elements of it. It makes me think more of Tim. It's really funny because as I was reading this, I've always remembered there's a Timothy Dalton interview where he talks about, you know, what he wanted to do with Bond, and he gets really, you know, big, like aggressive about it, and he starts to say, in the beginning, he was a masochist. He was Oh, he was a sadist, you know, like he gets really, and I always thought, too much, Tim, too much, okay? Like, you get the point. You're not Roger Moore. That's what you're saying, okay? You don't need to, like, you know, scare this poor lady who's trying to interview you. But as I was reading this about, he's right. This is the most awful. He's like, he comes across as a kind of Larry David figure. Like he's the sort of the platform for saying and thinking the most contemptible things,
right?
You could possibly think about anyone or anything, in a vaguely palatable way that we can enjoy. But you know, I mean, certainly that idea that Bond is a blunt instrument.
Yes, right, exactly.
Completely cold-hearted and callous until he's not, and then, you know, at least in this book, I don't know if he goes through the same process in the movie necessarily, but by the end of the book, he sort of goes, "Oh, I'll go back to being a callous prick again." Yeah. Except this time, I'm not gonna, you know, wait around for an adventure. That's, to me, that's the big character development in this story, which I find fascinating. But it's odd, especially as an origin story, because he's fully formed, then he gets vulnerable, and then he goes back to being fully formed again. It's an interesting arc.
Fully formed dick.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, that's completely the case. And the other thing that's interesting about that movie is it really does, and there's not many Bond movies that do this, it really adapts the beats of the novel.
It really does. And as I was going through the book, I was kind of pleasantly surprised retroactively for the movie that the movie did that.
Yeah.
You know,
it played, and because, you know, and I think that boils down to those beats work, you know, as a thriller. But it's interesting, you know. I think we'll talk a little bit about whether this is a good thriller later on in the discussion. Okay, so following approval by the James Bond Book Club Membership Committee, or JBMC, to use a complicated Fleming-esque acronym, Michael will receive this membership card by Royal Mail. It's going through England, so it'll be a while. And become the first member of the James Bond Book Club. So, Chapter 1. And stay tuned after our meeting to hear comments from readers collected from social media, as well as a 1-minute digestif version of the book, for those of you who didn't make it, all the way to page 144.
Oh, see, that's like 78.
So, you got 148?
78.
Did you get a large print book?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, yeah. I got the old, I'll talk about where I got these books later on in the show, but it doesn't have a front and a back page. I ripped those off.
I heard.
Yeah. That's what I was referring to. So I want to start by talking about the opening line of this book. Because I don't think it gets its dues as one of the best and most memorable in all of literature.
Go ahead.
The scent and smoke and sweat of a casino are nauseating at 3 a.m. That makes me very happy.
Well, it should.
What did you think upon reading that line?
I thought, right.
I was going to say that, like, what's great about that line is
also there's
you're there, but it's a place that you wouldn't necessarily be unless you've lived a tawdry life. So you're clearly coming at this from the angle of, true that.
Been there.
I've been there at 3 a.m. I don't think I have.
There's only, and for the most part, that is mostly true. But there's only one of two things that's happening at that time of night in a casino, and it's either the best night you've ever had or the worst.
And in this book, it's both.
Right.
Because
And
you,
so
you
to
get him
me,
losing everything, and
the-
then you get him beating Le Chiffre.
yeah, and the thing that's great about that opening line is it sets the table for one word, and that word is desperation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's again really interesting. Like for a generation of well, more than one generation. This book's like 70 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
Of people who are used to the Bond of the movies, to say that this guy is living by, you know, muscle, guts, and luck, to quote a Johnny Cash song, you know, there's no, he's not a superhero. He really is. He's living, he's playing every moment as best he can.
Sure.
Yeah. And I just think, I mean, it's just a fascinating, I mean, I don't think it's even the best one, the best opening line of a James Bond book. I have other favorites, but just, you know, to start with that in terms of throwing you into the world of this book in one sentence.
Well, because the book is this whole story revolves around gambling. And so, and that one line throws you into that world. You're fully immersed. You're not tiptoeing because the water's cold and trying, like, afraid to go up above the shorts because that's where it gets really cold. You're diving in. You're diving in right away.
And that is not an inappropriate metaphor, because there is more swimming in these novels
Right.
than you will ever find in any other literary franchise. Moonrake, the last third of Moonrake is basically
he's
swimming.
naked on the beach and forgets that he's naked.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, what you said brings me to another kind of key talking point I had, which was, and I think you've answered a question I was going to ask about time in the book, because I was really struck, especially compared to, you know, how linear the movie is, that this book begins like a third of the way through the story.
Right.
Flashes back to the beginning, and then as we go on, there's lots of overlapping and non-chronological time. Just not something we're used to in Bond fiction. You know, if you're only used to the movies, you might not be expecting something as experimental. I mean, you mentioned, like, you know, you're immersed immediately. I mean, do you think that's the purpose to it, or is it more clever than that? Is it like genuinely experimental? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to know more about James Bond literature, maybe literature in general, to speak to that. But you know, it seems certainly purposeful to me for this book and this character, and as the launch pad for the man we're going to follow.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is about starting in the present tense and not having to start with, you know, but we're so used to the movies, him starting with, he goes to M, he gets his mission, but that is like later in the book. And at least the first 5 Bond novels before the formula settles a little bit are kind of experimental with time and structure, and things happen in the wrong order. It's kind of, you get a sense
they get linear after that.
Not completely, but it sort of settles into something recognizable. But up to From Russia with Love, there's no sense of like what a James Bond book is going to look like structurally, I think, which is fascinating. And certainly this one, it does some interesting literary games, which brings me on to something I wanted to talk about, which was, not only is this the first book in which we see Bond, but this is Ian Fleming's first book. Did you have a sense of that? Do you have a sense of that when you were reading it, that this was a first novel?
It was one of my questions for you.
Yeah.
Because it was, and I just didn't look it up, but it was the thought in my head.
Yeah. And is there anything in particular that made you think this was a debut? I know I have mine.
I mean, for one, it's short.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I find that happens often. I guess that's not true. Maybe I'm just equating him with J.K. Rowling.
That's fine.
You know, the Harry Potters just get like this.
The two great literary bigots. You're on safe ground.
Exactly. I don't. It's kind of hard to describe, isn't it? But it's like there's a literary naivete.
Yeah, completely.
Right. So
to me, the first, well, I mean, the aside from sentences like the short walk was uneventful, which I don't, you've seen Throw Mama from the Train, haven't you?
Oh, of course.
It reminds me of the scene from that movie where writing professor Billy Crystal reads the opening line of his student Danny DeVito's story and sees that it's the same as the first line of the novel he's writing, which is "The night was humid." And I immediately link the short walk was uneventful to that. But aside from, you know, a few, like, and that's not pure naivete, it's like, you don't need that. You can cut that line. Just a sense in the opening chapters of, I want to tell you everything I know about everything, which just happens to be spying and gambling. Like, it feels like it's very Inside Baseball or The Masked Magician. You know, it's like, here's how it's done.
Yeah. That was the first moment I had the feeling when what's the name of the chapter? Is it just learning Baccarat? What's
you know what, Mike? I would love it to be just learning Baccarat, but it is, the game is Baccarat.
The game is Baccarat.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that, I just thought, oh, okay. I think I'm on to you, Ian.
You want us to know that
Ian's got something he has knowledge of, and he wants to teach us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
but interestingly enough,
I know what you're going to say.
I knew the game of Baccarat before I came into it, but interestingly enough, I kept thinking, this is probably really helpful for a lot of people.
Well, I don't know Baccarat. I'm a card coward. I can't, like, I vaguely understand some games, but I would never put myself out there and play card games. My limits are video blackjack at a bar in Vegas and just sit there and get the free cocktails, and I'm in heaven. That's it. I don't need the public to see how bad I am at all of these games, right?
So you still don't know Baccarat, is that right?
Sorry?
You still don't know it?
But that's the thing. I can understand this book fine without knowing Baccarat. He describes it in...
He tells you exactly how it works.
He tells you in great detail, and then he describes the moves of the game so fluidly and so accessibly in the rest of the book that even if you didn't retain that knowledge, you could understand what was going on, I think. Yeah,
I'll give you that.
But it works on both levels. I mean, I think, a little bit knowledge for knowledge's sake, but it's certainly interesting. I like the fact that that it seems like we're going into a lot of detail, and yet in the context of the book, it takes the amount of time it takes for them to eat a 4-course dinner for him to explain it. So I'm like, well, he must have been going into some detail if that's right. The case.
Oh my God, I even, until you said it, I literally forgot that Bond is explaining it to Vesper.
Yeah. And then, and then the coffees and the brandies came.
Fleming took a pause in the story to tell us about the game of Baccarat.
If you didn't know she was going to portray him before that dinner, she did afterwards.
Right.
I cannot sit through another 4-course explanation of a card game.
I'm done with this guy. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to betray him.
So I get a little bit of that. Like, it fascinates me. Fleming was in naval intelligence, and he described this book. He teased, we would say in modern parlance, said, I'm going to write the spy story of all spy stories.
Mm.
And, you know, in your head, you think, oh, that means, you know, I'm going to do the best spy novel that's ever been written. I think what he meant was, you can't do spy stories after this because I've told you everything. I've told you everything, that all the tricks of the trade. Spies can't like work anymore. Everyone's going to have to go into safe houses to retain their cover, and it's all over, because he gives away the ghost on so many things in the course of this novel.
Yeah, but at the same time, and I found it about the movie too, not that but it doesn't bother me in either instance, because there's not a lot of James Bond shit in this book or in the movie. You don't see Q. There aren't like gadgets. There's none of that.
No. Well, I mean, in general, you don't get a lot of that in the books. That is generally an invention of the movie. But even for the books, there's a sense that he's living completely on instinct and his resolve and his kind of like rugged approach to things.
Right.
He's MacGyvering his way through these these adventures. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, this is our first glimpse of a number of characters that have been in popular culture for nigh on 70 years now.
Mm-hmm.
From Bond,
Felix Leiter.
M, you know, and to a much lesser extent, Bill Tanner, the chief of staff, who is somewhat part of the movies, but not in a particularly serious way. He's been played a few times by a few different actors, but Bond and M have always been there. What did you think of the way that these characters were introduced? I mean, it's debatable whether at this point Fleming sees this as a series, so it might just be that these characters are just for this book only. But
if you knew anything about that,
yeah,
was this first book written as like a one-off at first, or did he always have the idea of serializing?
I don't think so. My answer is my unsatisfying answer is not necessarily.
Okay.
And I think, I mean, how did you feel about the way that like Felix Leiter as well being a huge one?
I mentioned him.
These what we now see as big iconic characters were introduced in this book.
Right.
How did you feel about from any of them?
I think it was a blast. I mean, I kept picturing Jeffrey Wright because I couldn't not do it.
Yep.
As I read it,
he would have been escorted out of the casino. I'm sorry.
I know. Yeah.
1953. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, sir. We're gonna have to ask you to leave. Why? Don't make. Then you get a terrible response.
Please don't make a scene, sir.
Don't make a scene. Exactly. Yeah. And it was interesting to constantly hear M referred to as he and his, because we spent so long with Judi Dench.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So we spend so much time with Bond, and Felix gets a good bit.
Yeah.
But M himself and the other characters, not enough in the book itself for me to latch on and kind of identify with in any kind of way of putting an anchor to the bottom of the ocean floor. Like,
I totally agree. And even with Felix a little bit, I mean, like, it's like at one point, like, oh, and that's Felix Leiter over there. And,
right.
Bond, you're a Bond fanboy going, that's Felix Leiter. Nobody knows that context yet. So you're just like...
Is Mathis the Q equivalent?
That's an interesting point, because he's the technology guy for sure. Like he has the bit with the radio set
Right.
surveillance, which is
Well,
very
it seems
cute.
like he has some skills beyond just technical too, right?
That's a really acute point. But and there's no sense. I mean, they mention Q in the book, but there's no sense in which that's a person. I mean, that I read it as that's the Q branch. It's like you should get that checked out with Q.
Right.
But I guess the movies just took the liberty of saying, well, why can't Q be a person
Right.
instead of just a division of the Secret Service,
Okay.
which is a genius idea. But I don't get the sense that that's what they're going for. No, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, a lot was made in the Daniel Craig Eon Casino Royale of Mathis reclaiming Mathis as a major character. But yeah, I guess the roots of Q are in there. That's really interesting because there's no Q in the novels. So
at all ever?
No.
Okay.
Well, I can't speak to after Fleming, but yes.
But yeah, I meant the Flemings. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That is, yeah, it is. It's yeah. Yeah, it's just so, I mean, that they're so casually, M is very one note in a very pleasing way. He's gruff and he's xenophobic. That's it. That's all we know.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was interested.
Bond really gets it in this book, and in the end, it's like, glad you're not dead. Call me when you can walk. I'll put you on another assignment.
Yeah, the only thing that I think is kind of formative there is like the relationship between Bond and M, this kind of brinkmanship that is like right there from the beginning. Neither of them is willing to like budge. And I think you see that in, play out in the rest of the books and the movies. And
then there's a whole second part to the government part. Who was Vesper working for?
Oh, that's a very good question.
I forget the name of.
He's working for a division that begins with one letter.
Because that division and her boss gets some play in this book.
Yeah. She's not from the Treasury, which is what the movie did.
But I can't remember ever seeing that in the films.
No, it's not that. No, she works for the Treasury in the films.
So I guess one of my questions to you was, is that branch or that division or that boss, is that played out a lot in the books or no?
No, I mean, it's certainly more bureaucratic. You get it. I mean, well, you get a flavor of it here, like memos between departments, and
yeah, right.
Everyone has to put their tick on the thing and all that sort of stuff. And it's just what the movies don't really bother with it because it's not very cinematic.
Okay.
But yeah, you get a better sense of the infrastructure of the Secret Service. I mean. Right. I always thought if you were in intelligence, you were bound by the Official Secrets Act. Ian Fleming seems to be willing to tell anyone anything.
Yeah. There are a few references to Bond, what he shares with Vesper, and there's a few references of I'll leave this out because that's confidential. But for the most part, it seems like he's willing to share willy-nilly. Just tell you everything.
Yeah, and the tone of it is very like, here's how it's done. You think you know how it's done, but here's how it's done.
It's like chomping on the cigar. Like, why don't you sit on my lap? I'll tell you a story about in the spy game.
It's like David Mamet says, everybody loves to go backstage.
Now I'm going into host mode. But
that's fine. That's fine. I'm
for you.
So I'm good.
Does James Bond, written in this book, does his love for Vesper feel earned to you?
Oh, good question. I mean,
because when all of a sudden he declares, that's it, I'm going to ask her to marry me, I thought, really?
Yeah.
This guy? Seems out of character.
It is. I mean, it's very, I think, purposefully out of character.
But yeah, exactly. Because the other part of that equation is there's lots of detail into he's noticing this about her, he's noticing that about her, a shadow crosses her face, this, that. And that's the subterfuge. And then he does have a line towards the end of all those things he was batting away. As a writer, I can connect with that of like, there's a part of your brain as you're typing that says, this is a problem. Shut up. And you just keep writing. And so, so I can understand a character, especially if you're whatever, you're smitten kitten with someone, and you're falling in love, or able to convince yourself you're falling in love, and you see problems but bat them away. But that seemed out of character for the character to me.
Yeah, I think the journey for Bond is a very strange one in this book, and it's you know, I was gonna say his arc is, but it's not an arc. It's a it's a full circle, and you collect $200 at go.
Okay, yeah.
It's like you go around and you get something on the way. It's not an arc, you know. It's like, so he starts off cold, you know, callous and misogynistic, and you know, women are to be used. He learns to love and be vulnerable through Vesper. It opens up this whole idea that, oh, you know, like I think of things in black and white terms, but the world is actually ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
And he expresses that to Mathis. Mathis goes, "You're talking shit.
You're crazy.
You're a spy." And then, you know, when she portrays him, he goes 360 and goes back to that way of thinking, except this time he's like, well, now I've got revenge on my mind and I'm not going to sit behind a desk anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a means to to me, it's like a means to an end of having this kind of hero who's ready for action at the end of it, the end of the book.
Well, and that's how I always felt about that first Daniel Craig movie too. I thought it was really interesting that they gave the character of James Bond a shitty guy out. Like, this is why he's the way he is.
Yeah.
This is the origin of why he is the way he is.
Yeah,
and that was interesting.
It approaches tragedy in this. I mean, that to me, it's somewhat, you know. And I don't think it's too much of a leap to say, you know, Ian Fleming, he has a classical education, you know, as a wealthy British person. Mm-hmm. He will have seen, you know, Greek tragedy and understood that, you know, it's more dramatic if the person who, you know, achieves self-knowledge at the time at which they're most vulnerable to what they are.
Yeah.
And you know, you see this through Shakespeare and Hamlet and that kind of stuff. And so I think you know, it's a way of bringing the tragedy to it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, is it earned, and it's hard to rationalize,
right?
In that sense. And you know, let's talk about bigotry, because it's hard not to.
We're gonna have to. I started making highlights.
Oh, go for it.
I mean, of things that I went, whoa. Bond saw luck as a woman to be softly wooed or brutally ravaged. What the fuck?
Oh, man. Well,
there's a thing end here.
You're fucking with my question.
Oh.
Because my question was like, benefit of the doubt, how much is this Bond and how much is this Fleming? Lines like that don't help the ambiguity.
Yeah, it's rough.
So, I mean, my main question is, whose bigotry is it anyway? Because so much of this filters through Bond's
privacy in her. Wait, hang on. And now he knew, because there was something about Vesper and that no matter what happened between them, that she'd always keep something of herself to herself. She found profoundly exciting and sensual, but that the conquest of her body, because of the central privacy in her, would each time have the sweet tang of rape.
Yeah.
Ugh. I need a drink.
Your reaction is not unwarranted.
I'd like to mind erase that from my brain.
Here's where I'll be something of an apologist.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Go on.
No, not for this. So I think there are various levels of bigotry in this. There's the bigotry that Bond expresses through the thoughts that we hear. And you said up top, hearing Bond's thoughts is fucking weird.
Yeah.
And because so many of those thoughts are just plain wrong. So I think there is a part of this book which is about making those thoughts as extreme as possible to define Bond as an extreme misogynist, because of the journey that I just talked about that he goes on. And then there's like casual, unprompted bigotry that just comes out of nowhere. I don't know where it is, but they suddenly says that, the Asiatic races are not good at gambling. What? We weren't even talking about that.
Yeah.
It just comes out of
talking
nowhere.
about this for?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have to go through it. It's sexism, racism and xenophobia, ableism. That's not just something in the Bond movies. We have a disabled villain here.
Right.
Who has a disabled villain sidekick. It's classism, is everywhere.
Abound, yeah.
Abound, yeah. But I think there are times at which it is genuinely about creating a character who is prejudiced. But I mean, it reminds me of that there's amazing footage of a town hall meeting from, I think, the 70s, and Norman Mailer with a group of female academics, including the now disgraced Germaine Greer. And his argument is what I'm selling here is basically like, I'm not a misogynist, my characters are, right? That's what he's saying. And then I can't remember who it was. I don't think it was Germaine Greer, but somebody, maybe it was someone from the audience actually, I think, who basically responded by sort of saying, he is the kind of biography of the character from the book that you're talking about. And everyone in the room started laughing because it was Norman Mailer.
Right.
Like they were indistinguishable from each other. And it's a dangerous game. And I think he's overplaying his hand, to use a card rep.
Right.
But I think there genuinely is an attempt to make Bond as contemptible as possible, a real prototypical anti-hero in a time when you didn't get that many of those.
That's true.
But that's as far as I'll go. But then there's other times where you can see like casual latent racism just seeping through the pages. When they describe Le Chiffre and they talk about the offensive pantomime of his inhaler, I'm like, guy's disabled. And the same with the man with the stick who's like falsely claimed his counterparts falsely claiming disability benefits, and it's like, well, I mean, that's like a double bigotry. You've got like ableism and anti-socialism at the same time. So I think there's excusable and inexcusable elements of the bigotry in this novel.
Okay, I mean, that's the thing. What was it you and I were talking about? Oh, it was one of the Final Destination movies where we were, there was a racist in the Final Destination movie.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was harsh and it was blunt and it was hard, it was just terrible to watch. But it also, there was no reason for like that. It provided nothing to the movie for this character to be racist, Yeah. And so I guess the question I have, but you also have to keep in mind it's written in 1953 by you know, like you said, a rich British man. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where maybe it is what it is.
Well, let's talk about 1953, because aside from, you know, outdated attitudes, this jumps off the page at me as a book from you know, post World War II, really.
Okay.
I mean, much more so, because by the time the movie started, you know, 62, it's a very different world. And I read a lot of this book through post, you know, like a lot of it can be explained through the fact that World War II's just happened.
Mm.
Did you get any sense? Did you get a sense of that, or did it?
I don't know that I did. Or maybe I just wasn't conscious of it. But of course, I also didn't grow up in England, so.
Right. Well, I mean, one thing that this this book, I'm so used to talking about movies with you.
Yeah.
That this book is.
But I have to, like, here's what I'll say about it was that, because I guess I didn't, but that might be the movie's fault, because the movie, which is like made in 2006,
right,
and follows at least the portion of the book, you know, that, like you said, the plot points of the book very closely.
Yeah.
It felt like, maybe it's because of the movie, that as I was reading it, I was thinking of the movie of that time, which is, you know, only 15 years ago,
right,
and feels very contemporary. So I think that's what I was. I think that's where my mindset was, just because I'm coming at this from a different place where I didn't read the books first, and my only other frame of reference is the movies, and in particular this movie of the same title.
Well, just a couple of things that really jumped out to me was, first, that, you know, in the reality of the post World War II world, America jumps to the top of the line in world espionage, and Britain disappears. And these books are trying to reconcile that, I think.
Okay.
Because they're trying to say that, you know, there's a place for Britain in the post-war espionage world, in the world of the Cold War, which is largely, you know, America and Russia. But we're very much, you know, I mean, it's a little bit of toadying up to America in this book, which is partly Ian Fleming. You know, he was a real Yankophile. And you can see that, you know, in the book. He sort of talks about people from Texas are the greatest people in the world, blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff. And you know, the way that Felix Leiter gives him the capital.
I was going to say I was just going to say the same thing. I mean, Felix saves the day, all of that. Yeah.
And so that jumps out at me. The other thing is, like, you know, in 1953 in Britain, we still had rationing, wartime rationing. This can go until 1955. So this, like, all the kind of indulgences of this book of, like, over describing food and drink and over describing locations is very much about giving British people the access to things that they couldn't even dream of having. Like, even the idea of, like, a full-course meal.
That's interesting. Yeah, in that context, that makes, you know.
And Live and Let Die is even worse than that. Like, even bigger it comes across. But, you know, just those moments. But this is the only book, I think, where, probably because it's so close to the end of World War II, where you actually get a sense of, like, Bond's on a budget. We've never seen Bond on a budget. He talks about, like, having to keep his money, you know, he's constantly thinking about, like, I can't spend too much here. I can't do this. But this amount of money, I got to do, like, it's the last time we even think about that.
But at the same time, like you said, I mean, there's some serious food porn descriptions in this book, you know?
Oh, tell me about that, because there's a major talking point.
I mean, it's just like all over the place. And I guess my question for you is, are all the books like that, or is that specific to this book, or
No, it's a Fleming
it's a
thing.
Fleming thing? Okay.
It's a t-shirt. It's a Fleming thing. Oh, I would say food and drink, women, in terms of how much they're described, they're about equal.
Mm-hmm.
I think food and drink might even be more than women, at least in this book. I mean,
that was another note.
Yeah, go for it.
Just the description of women and Vesper in particular. I mean, it's like a full page.
It will like, this is what I think, right? This is my this is my overall thought about that. If a woman is worth describing in an Ian Fleming novel, she's worth describing from head to toe in pornographic detail. Right. And, when we're talking about first, this is the first use of a word that will always be used to describe women's breasts from now on, which is jutting. Jutting breasts again and again and again and again and again. But it's like porn and food porn. Right. Like they exist in this. I mean, it's the food porn. Yeah, is partly about it's like wish fulfillment. The British public don't have access to this, so they're just dreaming through these words.
Yeah,
I think it's just also about Fleming as a person. I mean, he was like a human. I say human supersize me. It's like Morgan Spurlock was a human, but he lived inhumanly for a while.
That's great.
But that was like Ian Fleming's base.
That's where it starts from. That first meal that makes Morgan Spurlock puke?
Yeah.
That's his baseline.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to me to like track food and drink through this novel. At one point, he's like ordering caviar with extra toast on the same day that he's had a giant lunch and a giant breakfast.
Right.
And I just thought, yeah, like, I mean, maybe it shouldn't have been McDonald's at all. It should have been like try and do, a Bond novel.
Yeah. Try
and eat like a Bond, eat and drink.
Well,
like
I also specifically remembered at one point, I think towards the end of the novel, there's a point where he said, I think maybe Vesper had ordered or finished the lobster with melted butter. Mm-hmm. And that's all it says. But it just seems like he's trying to up the decadence with the word melted, which is a common thing that you get with lobster all the time,
Not in 1950, like even the idea of lobster was beyond.
Okay, then maybe that's it.
Yeah.
It seemed like
you're not wrong.
With melted butter.
I don't want to blow my load for Live and Let Die, but I gotta say it because it's screaming out. At the beginning of Live and Let Die, Felix Leiter serves Bond a meal, like a room service meal, that he describes as if it is like caviar encrusted, the best meal you possibly describe. Do you know what this meal is?
Franks and beans?
You're almost there. Hamburger, fries, ice cream, and a bottle of Riesling.
Well, you got to have a Riesling. Riesling is always my choice with the burger and fries.
But you do, I mean, but that's exactly, you're absolutely right. It's like, it's there for its pornographic quality, and literally British people will be salivating while they eat their powdered egg.
Yeah, and this has nothing to do with anything too, but just because, because my brain works with interchanging with movies and all of that, because all I kept thinking about as I read was food porn. And then you have Lashif, who in the movie was played by Mads Mikkelsen, who starred in Hannibal as Hannibal, which is one of the biggest fucking food porn shows of all time. And so everything just felt so interconnected and, webby.
Webby, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, when we alluded, you know, that there's food porn and there's porn.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, were you surprised at the amount of? No, go on.
Well, I want to hear your question first.
I was going to say, are you surprised about the extent to which this book approached the level of pornography?
No.
Given when it was written?
That's interesting.
You couldn't just put anything in a book in 1953 in Britain.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I had thought it's not surprising just because that's what after reading that first line, that's what I assumed was like the sex, you know.
Oh, yeah.
I thought the sex would be on the level of the nausea of 3 a.m. gambling hall.
Oh, that's definitely the tone of it. Yeah, no, I do not.
So I thought it was it was what I expected from Ian Fleming. When, you know, as I got through the first few pages. So it wasn't surprising to me in that way. The thing that was surprising to me, because we have a lot of interplay between Bond and Vesper. And I mean, we have chapter and chapter and chapter of a full page, like I said, of a description of what she looks like and this and that. And then you have inner Bond thoughts of what he wants to do to her and this and that. And I want to do this and take off this and then do this and have her succumb.
Yeah.
All this shit. And then we get to the night that he thinks it's going to happen. And she, you know, and she's saying, no, I want dinner first. And it's put off and like this. And then they kiss. And then she's like, stop it, you rogue. And like all this kind of stuff. And it doesn't happen. And then when it finally does happen, there isn't a huge description of them making love.
Yeah, it's like a fade to black. Almost.
Yeah, it's to me. I thought Ian Fleming must have had a stroke that night, or
maybe he just thought it wouldn't get past the censors.
Maybe. I was shocked, though. I was shocked, pleasantly shocked, but I was shocked because I thought we were going to go into like Fabio romance novel territory. That's what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, when the word nipples comes out, you're preparing for something. No, what you're saying is so interesting because I think, you know, he's playing a very deft game with censorship.
Okay.
I think he's trying to push it as far to the line when it comes to representations of sex, specifically sex and torture, as possible, but still wants to have that deniability. So it's like, I didn't say penis and balls. I just said it.
Right.
You said penis and balls. I said it. Doesn't need to be his penis and balls. And that's, you know, like, but you know, and the first time I read this, I didn't even particularly register the testicle torture scene.
Oh man. And it's every bit as visceral as it is in the movie.
Right. And you know, like, and such a big thing was made of like, are they going to put that in the movie? At the time, I remember at the time it was like, you know,
oh really?
Yeah, I think it was a sort of like, for a lot of people, that is their takeaway from this book. Is, especially for men, it's like, can you imagine anything worse? You know, and it's like, do we want to see, you know?
Yeah, screw bamboo under the fingernails.
I know. Yeah. Do you want to see Bond go through? You know, you really want to see Bond go through this.
But what I did found very visceral, and this was the portion where I found the writing to be quite good because it had the spy element to it too, was the descriptive part where Fleming started describing getting to the moment of going past the pain.
Oh yeah.
That was very effective, I thought, of waiting for that moment, but not letting them know you've gotten to that moment so that they don't, you know, kind of back off. But people in the espionage game know that under torture, you can get to a point where you don't even feel anything at all anymore.
Yeah.
and it's just a slow degrade until you die, and he wants to get to that point. That was interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
and that was quite good writing in that moment, I thought.
Completely. I think and I remember thinking, like, doesn't he try to imagine that it's pleasurable, like,
well,
like it's like he tries to imagine it in a sexual sense. I'm like, you're giving the subtextual game away here. But
yeah, exactly.
Like,
but I thought there was also an added part of isn't somewhere getting over the hump of you're starting to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's right. Which, I think are pretty subversive thoughts for 1953. Like,
yeah. Real masochist kind of.
Yeah, and
you might even use that word, but
no, I mean, definitely.
But yeah,
there's a conversation that, well, the only recorded audio we have of Raymond Chandler is his conversation with Ian Fleming on the BBC that they did, and it was clear that each of them knew each other's work. Fleming was total fanboy. Chandler, as you imagine, not much so, but he clearly read his stuff. And
how many books deep was Fleming when?
I can't remember. I'll have to figure that out, but it's a little while from here. Probably like post Dr. No, I think. Because Chandler, apropos of nothing, just says, "Why do you always have torture in your books?" And Ian Fleming, like ultimate self-deprecator, as he is throughout this interview, because he's talking to his idol, he says, "Oh, it's just the easiest thing to write. It's just the easiest way." And then Chandler says, "Brainwashing, that's the way to go." And he took that advice. So like the pretty much, the books from then on were all about Bond being brainwashed by the Russians. No, it's amazing. I mean, why? Of course, like everyone's like, "Oh, plagiarist." Why the fuck wouldn't you? If Raymond Chandler's telling you to do this, I would do it. I wouldn't even question it. But I think it's interesting, that he has this, that's certainly at the time, that was the thing that really outraged people, was he had so much torture in his book, and the psychosexual underpinnings of that, though the kinds of things that was bringing into the world of literature was like really offensive to a lot of people. And I just love that. I love that he's, that just that kinkiness.
Yeah.
And it's right there from the beginning. Like I said, it gives the subtextual game away.
Sure.
Completely right away. I want, so, elephant in the room, is this a good thriller? Because this is a thriller. Is it a good thriller?
I guess my response is it a thriller?
Is it yeah, right. Okay, good. Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that it is. I do find it.
If you read this book, like, let's pretend Bond hasn't happened. If you read this book, what would you say this book is? Like, what genre? What does it make you? What other books does it make you think of?
I just think of it because it's not like John Le Carre or
No.
I mean, it's but I mean, it's dealing with spy shit, and of course, I'm only going off the one book.
Well, that might have been all there was.
It feels more spy adventure.
It's a very specific adventure.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to peg.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that adventure is the right word, but I don't know that thriller is the right word. Because let's face it, so much of the book, not so much, but I mean, this book is called Casino Royale, and the main character's playing a fucking card game.
Yeah.
They're just sitting at a card table for much of it. But But
I mean, that was one of...
That's another section that's written really well to me. Like, if, you know, I understand Baccarat. So, but so you said you could follow it?
Move on. This is not, I'm not on trial here. No,
it's just satisfying my curiosity because I found that section of the book very compelling.
Okay, good, yeah.
And I assume you did too. But you're also saying that you might not understand all the rules of Baccarat, but you were able to follow it, you said.
I was able to follow it, and I think, you know, the takeaway from that for me is you don't need to go over the rules. Like, if you're a good writer, which Ian Fleming is, you can do it without telling people the rules. I think, you know, the rule, like, I think it's closer to what you're saying. It's like, I know the rules of Baccarat. There's nothing I don't know about Baccarat. Let me tell you. It's that guy. But, yeah, I mean, you know,
that would be interesting if we didn't have that chapter. If you just cut that chapter.
A lot of writers would say, cut that chapter.
You're saying the writing's good enough that you could follow the game anyway.
I think so. But, I mean, and that's the central question about whether this is a good thriller to me, is like, there are times at which I go, oh, yeah, this is paced and structured so well. I love how the action is scattered across the book, so we never get bogged down too much.
To me, you don't really get into thriller mode until Vesper is kidnapped in Bond Chase.
And, you know, it disproves that Eddie Izzard joke about there's no car chases in books. Because there's a car chase in this book. And it's like a car chase in a movie.
Yeah, it is.
And I think very much on purpose. It's like, it's as if he can see the edits in his head when he's writing it. And I think it's great. But it's interesting that you mentioned, you know, like, you found the Baccarat section compelling, and I do too, even though I don't really know what's going on until he says what's going on. Because I remember, and you saw some of this when I did a stage reading of a TV miniseries that I wrote called about Ian Fleming's Moonraker novel, which has a game of bridge in it. We had some kind of images of the plays of the game on PowerPoint as it was going on, and that was my answer to, like, what's going on.
Cool, you know? By the way, I like that.
Yeah, you could look up and see what was going on. And, you know, an audience member came up to me afterwards, and it was like, oh, I was getting really engrossed in the game. So I think what's great is that it has that, like, you know, if you're a hobbyist, you know, and this, you know, it's like the beginning of this book is like Confessions of a Croupier, you know. So I think it's got that inside track, but it's also like not leaving out the people who are too dumb like me to follow a card game. Because he writes it in a way that literally anyone can understand what's going on. I think it's really interesting. But there are times in this book where I think, like, oh, that's a really good, you know, that's a really good bit of suspense, or that's a really good bit of action. And there's other times I think, like, you're giving the game away too quickly.
Okay, what's an example of that?
Well, I mean, just like, you know, Vesper's a traitor from the first time she's introduced. It's just there's so many.
You think that's in the writing, or say?
No, I mean, I didn't know that the first time before I read it, and I'd never seen Casino Royale before I read this, and I felt exactly the same way. I just, there are times where he's not interested in writing a thriller in so much as a documentary. I don't know. It's like,
yeah, right.
Like, and he's, you know, he was the forum manager of a newspaper. So the travel log aspect.
That to me is interesting because that's starting to fill some gaps.
Yeah.
Because it's so funny you just said that, because I was just about to say that this book feels like the day-to-day happenings of James Bond while has to play cards to try and bankrupt Le Chiffre. I mean, that, you know,
I mean,
it feels like a reporting of what James Bond's doing.
So, I mean, literally, I think there are moments in this book where you could copy paste this into a TripAdvisor review and no one would be the wiser.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, this is not even theoretical. Like, there's a short story called Bond in New York, which was quite literally Ian Fleming's account of being in New York. He wanted people to publish it, so he took out Ian Fleming and wrote James Bond.
Right.
And that is also the, I mean, you mentioned butter earlier. He gives his recipe for scrambled eggs. And you know what the secret ingredient is?
Butter.
Butter. It's a, you know, you've heard of all like butter shortbread. All butter shortbread. This is all butter scrambled eggs. I mean, we go carry on. Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna. This is a minor thing, but
I bet
there's a lot of French in this book.
Yes.
So much French, and if you don't know French, it's one of those things where you say whatever, and then he did this and he did this and you know, and then you go. But
if you have not read this book, people who are watching this, Michael has just given like the most accurate description of Ian Fleming's prose.
Right. But my most sublime moment, and this will be an explanation as to why I love movies.
Yeah.
Was the card game was about to commence, and who is it that's like kind of running the, not Le Chiffre himself, but like, because he's not the banker, but the sort of the guy just sort of running the table.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I say croupier, but I don't know what the
And at one point he kind of I read the words "Le Jeu se fait," and I went like, the game is up.
Yeah.
And
right.
And the only reason I knew that was because of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Because Rooney says that to who he thinks is Ferris Bueller. It was such a sublime moment for me.
Well, I mean, just to contextualize some of that, if you watch the Everything or Nothing, the story of 007 documentary, which I heartily recommend you do, it covers the books and the movies, everything you would need to know about James Bond in fiction. It's a wonderful documentary. I saw it on my birthday in 2012. Made me very happy. In a movie theater. What you like? There was a famous British journalist called Malcolm Muggeridge, who
great name.
Oh yeah, great name for a terrible human being, and he came out against Ian Fleming on the basis of that the book is all snobbery. And it's not even real snobbery. It's the snobbery of an expense account man. So basically what he's saying is it's like a snob who is not really a snob.
Who's not an actual snob.
Who only knows like the surface level of the snob, you know, like what all sort of the guy who thinks napkins is called serviettes when they're really called napkins, and that's a trick to catch people out who are not really rich. You know, it's that sort of thing. And I've never really, you know, like, there's definitely a lot of examples of that. I think that's a hideous thing to say about someone, but it's definitely the idea of like he knows and you know, but I think a big part of it for me, one of the things I really love about this book and these books as a whole is just how accessible they are. Like he uses references that, I mean, maybe they were too timely, but they don't seem that way now. But he's describing Bond. He says he looks like Hoagie Carmichael. I mean, I still know who that is, but many don't. Hoagie Carmichael was a American singer-songwriter. I would say, imagine Adrian Brody.
Okay.
He's in a few movies. He's in To Have and Have Not.
Oh, okay.
The Bogey Bacall movie. Certainly doesn't look like any of the actors who've ever played James Bond. And, you know, when they're describing Felix Leiter, they say he looks like Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
And I really like that sort of, I think he is more of a populist than people have kind of understood. Like, he's speaking to a wider public, but he wants to let you know that he's better than you.
Speaking also specifically to Felix Leiter, that was a moment for me in the book because Felix Leiter early on, like African American, or am I thinking of the wrong? Who in Dr. No and like those first movies?
Yeah.
Is that Felix? Huh?
He's from Hawaii Five-0.
Damn it. Why did I have that in
the first Black Felix Leiter is another 48 hours. now we're talking in our code.
Bernie Casey.
Yeah, that's the first Black Felix Leiter.
Which movie was that?
Never Say Never Again.
Okay. For some reason, I thought there was an early African-American Felix Leiter too. And so I thought there was that, then Bernie Casey, and then Jeffrey Wright. And so, well, now it's just all based on my error. But, but as I was reading, I was waiting to see if Ian Fleming had written him as a black man. And of course he had not.
Well, I'll rescue you out of this hole, Mike.
Go.
In Live and Let Die, Felix Leiter talks about, a lot of it's set in Harlem, and Felix Leiter talks about how basically he's kind of like Lyndon Johnson. He was like I come from a poor white background. I understand black people. I love jazz.
Jesus.
I know, but for Ian Fleming, that's big,
right?
He basically comes out and he's like this, you know, this is Harlem, like black people are everywhere, you know, there's nothing to be afraid of, Mr. Racist British person. Yeah. So maybe that's where they were kind of
all right
leading towards, but certainly here he is a white Texan, that is for sure. Well, I've only got a couple of talking points left.
Sure.
Is there anything to be made of the adopting the perspective of Vesper a couple of times in this novel?
Okay, so I'm so glad you brought this up because that was part of my beginning novelist thing. It just.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's what struck me as I was reading it, because we're so in Bond's perspective throughout the whole novel that when he peppers it with like a paragraph or two on a couple of pages of Vesper, I thought, what are you doing? And why are you doing it?
Is that not a good thing for him to try and think in terms of how Vesper might see this?
Well, if you mean him the man, then yes, but him the novelist, I'm not so sure.
Oh, interesting.
And only because you have seemed to have made a choice. You know what I mean? Like he's going for third person, he, him, that, you know, Bond, you know. And then all of a sudden you have Vesper's perspective. And I thought, wait, what? We're on like a page 140 of 178. What are you doing? So
would you be surprised to learn would you be surprised to learn that Ian Fleming wrote an entire James Bond novel from the perspective of a woman?
Yes.
James Bond sleeps with.
Absolutely. Which novel?
Got it right here. The Spy Who Loved Me.
Oh, okay.
Now, you probably know the movie, The Spy Who Loved Me. Okay? Erase that from your brain. Because The deal was, we want the title. We don't want the book. This book, and this is going to be our next book, by the way.
Nothing to do with the movie, is what you're saying.
Zero.
Wow.
This was Fleming. This is why I think this is more interesting than, as you're saying, like, well, I should really look at things from her perspective. Actually, that's not a good idea. Let's go back to what we were doing, which is not untrue at all. That's exactly how it plays in the novel. But the fact that he did a whole book of the same length, exact same length, which is basically to say, if I was the woman that Bond slept with and then disposed of, how would I feel? That's what this book is about.
Wow.
And yeah. So, and that's also a good qualification for me saying, after 5 books, it all settles down. It all gets very, this is a late book in which is narrated all from the point of view of a woman. And Bond is in like a quarter of the book. So.
Oh, I so want to read it.
Yeah, and I guess I wanted to like bring that up because it for me it kind of like put that adoption of point of view, which, as you say, comes out of absolutely nowhere,
right?
Anywhere, and then her suicide note into some kind of perspective, like Ian Fleming has his issues with women, but he is trying to understand things from their perspective, badly and
poorly, right? Yeah.
But he, I don't see that many writers of his time and politics putting themselves out there in that same thing. I mean, there's a conspiracy theory believes that he did that so that they would stop asking him to write James Bond books, but
well, let me ask you this: is your next talking point the last line of the book?
I feel a little bit shamed, but yes. Of course it is. Of course it is. Look at this. Look at this pro.
Well, just because
he's like, he's figured out a structure. I know where he's going.
Well, just from a lover of movies. When I heard that line in the movie, I went, "Whoa!"
Oh, it really stands out in 2006.
Yeah.
Just as it does in 2021, even more so.
It really does. But
what is the last line of the book for those of you who are waiting for that 1-minute digestive version?
Oh, sorry. The bitch is dead.
Now.
Right. Sorry.
No, I mean, you got the crux of that line.
Oh,
I would say bitch is the operative word there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was jarring when I heard Daniel Craig say that in the movie.
Yeah.
But I also, it was one of those, like, this is the interesting thing to me about this book of, we spoke that particular movie seems to grain against Bond as we know him, but that does seem to be the Bond of this book, Daniel Craig's version of James Bond.
Yeah. Which
I find very interesting. And so the idea that he, like you said, that he became vulnerable and gave himself over, and she turned out to be a double agent and a spy. Well, now she's a bitch, and this is the way, now this is like a new line of demarcation, and I am going forth into the world in a, I guess not in a different way. I'm going to revert back to the asshole I was, but
I'm not going to be risk averse anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm never going to let this happen again. Yeah. And I had that feeling in that movie when he said that, and at the end of this book. And as the book went on, I thought, is that line going to be in this book? And then as we got closer, I thought, it's going to have to be in this book. And then by the time I was reading the
Yeah, this book is not beneath
Suicide note, I thought this is going to be the last line of the book.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's interesting because it's the last line of the book, so you draw more attention to it than you would otherwise.
Right.
You know, bearing in mind some horrific things have been said. I sound like a bartender. Hey, things have been said. Okay, you can't take it back. Let's just all go home and forget about this.
Right.
But you're absolutely right that all those character things are in there.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose of it. And it really is to tell you, like, that whatever wounds this created have been, you know, sealed shut.
Mm-hmm. Hermetically sealed.
Yeah. That said, you know, you can't ignore the reductive misogyny, you know, and and it's a shame if you were going to boil the book down to this.
Right.
You don't. Fleming gives critics of this book an excuse to boil it down to pure bigotry, I think, by that kind of line. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that the movie then moves it up a little bit. So it's not the be all and end all of the book. It's like,
well, and because it's a movie and because movies are visual, you have a whole set piece of the deception separate from what happens in the book.
Yeah.
It's different but the same.
Yeah.
But I think in the movie they also try to make her a little more sympathetic.
I find her pretty sympathetic here.
I do too, but
I think that half a page of her perspective in the suicide note goes a long way.
Yeah.
To and that's why, you know, it's kind of interesting that
is it a lover in the movie?
Yes.
I thought it was a brother.
No, but I actually think this is where the book is better than the movie.
Okay.
Well, it's not in Casino Royale, but in a following movie, they sort of say that this guy was complicit all along and he was stringing her along, and that sort of devalues
right. Okay. Yeah.
her portrayal a little bit, that he was just another player. So, but yeah, it's a little weird, you know, like it's such a big, you know, you have heard her story, you've understood her story, you empathize with what she's gone through, and then they hit you with this. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it makes me want to think it makes me want to agree with what Ian Fleming says, you know, is he never wanted people to like James Bond. He wanted people to think of him critically. Mm-hmm. And that last line is like a damning indictment of a man who refuses to learn from what he's been through.
Yeah. Are there debate circles on that about James Bond himself or about Ian Fleming, like his intention?
Ian Fleming's spoken to it a few times. He's like, he's said in explicit and indirect terms, like, this is an anti-hero. Let's not think of this guy as everything we want to aspire to be. Hero. Yeah, as everything we want to aspire to be. And that's why I read so much of the bigotry in this book as a means to an end, to suggest that Bond is an undesirable character. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, outside of that, critics have sort of said that, you know, Ian Fleming is everything. And again, this is where the Larry David of it all comes in. It's like Bond is in the same way that Curb Your Enthusiasm Larry David is everything real Larry David wants to be, but is too cowardly to do or say. That people have said that about James Bond and Ian Fleming too, that it's just like that one is a natural extension of the other if he had no filter. You know, if he had no if he had no ability to censor himself or restrain himself from what he thinks or says. But there's so many occasions where it seems so deliberate, and but then there are moments when without doing that indirect perspective thing that we get through a lot of the novel, is James Bond thought this, James Bond thought that. Yeah. Ian Fleming's just saying, you know what? Asian people are a bit shifty, aren't they? And then I'm like, well, that makes me not want to give you the benefit of the doubt. Ever. That this is all Bond and not you. And there's obviously some overlap between the two of them and their way of seeing the world. Mm-hmm. But there are times in which it feels like the curmudgeon in Bond who's saying these things, not just Ian Fleming. Like, oh well, she's a woman, she doesn't know what she's doing. When Vesper's attacked, it really brings out the misogynist in him.
Really brings out the worst in him, doesn't it? Yeah.
Like, well, it's like, how would she let herself be taken? It's like, she put a skirt over her head. What the fuck was she supposed to do?
It wasn't that though, Tom. It was how did, the funny thing to me is he kept blaming her for even going out there in the first place and not realizing, yet he himself did not pick up on it.
But I think there were lots of
30 seconds after, until she would have realized it.
He took his eye off the ball just as she did. And I think I'm gonna say, just as
he's no dumber than he was.
Right. I mean, it's a lot of projecting. There's a lot of this book. I think the author is as critical as Bond as he is of the other characters. It's just that we're seeing so much of this through Bond's perspective that we're able to see his judgments of other people clearer than we can see other people's judgment of him.
Right.
And that's the most I can say in defense of the bigotry of this novel. So finally, adaptations. We've mentioned always want to see where this book has been adapted. This is an interesting one. There are 3 adaptations in visual media. The first being from the anthology series Climax on NBC television in 1954, 1 year after this book was published, with Barry Nelson as Jimmy Bond, CIA. Jimmy Bond, CIA, yes.
Wow.
We haven't actually talked about the 1967 David Niven starring parody film version with 5 directors and at least 7 James Bonds. I think there's probably actually more of that in total. Right. Have you seen that movie?
I have not. Well, that's not exactly true. I've seen bits and parts of it, but I've never sat down and watched the whole thing.
Well, you might be onto something there. But, it's, I mean, what's kind of interesting about post-publication, Fleming sold off the rights to this one novel, immediately regretted it when he saw the NBC TV version of it, because, he'd sold off the rights, they did what they wanted with it. And that influenced his decision to choose, people he trusted with the rest of the books, the broccoli and Salisbury.
Okay. Yeah.
So that explains why he was like, he has to be British, he has to be all those things. And then 67 is like, someone picked up the rights. So the rights to Casino Royale kind of floated around for years and years, and they only got it back in like 2005 to make the official Eon Bond film version of this, which we have talked about extensively, which was Daniel Craig's debut and the the first reboot in the series, which is kind of interesting to me because, you know, we've had two versions of this movie that have not treated it as an origin story, because we were so far into the Bond films by that point. 67, and in 54 there wasn't even any Bond films. So it's kind of this book has had an interesting history in the way that it's been adapted as well.
Or adapted, yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to draw some minor attention to that. As we reach the end of Vesper's suicide note, that's all she wrote. Mike, your membership card is on its way, along with an AA pamphlet. Thank you so much for joining the James Bond Club.
Pleasure. I mean, for no other reason.
Well, as I say, this is all a cover for day drinking.
You could see that some words gave me a trip up by the end of the second cocktail. So
yeah, vulnerable came out
3 times.
Came out in a post Vesper haze, I might say. Anything you'd like to plug before we go? I mean, I've given you credits, but is there anything particularly working on now?
Obviously, everybody should be listening to the Everything Sequel podcast.
Yeah, not just the Rambo episodes.
All of them.
I don't know who's out there who is making us look like the most popular podcast in the world based on our Rambo episodes. Listen to something else, guys. I'm sorry.
I got an email today that said from YouTube that said your YouTube watches are, I don't know, something at like 2,900. And I thought, that's horseshit. We got 3,000 just for Rambo 2 alone, but that was for last month.
Oh.
So I'm looking forward to that email for next month, for this month. But it's a rocking good time. I mean, you know, please listen to all those episodes and go ahead and listen to the How Dare You podcast as well. And
excellent podcast.
You know, Lonesome Whistle.
And vote in the How Dare You Awards. You can still do that, right?
Yes. I have not officially announced the winners, so go ahead and vote.
Oh, but the voting is closed?
Nah. Screw it. I'll accept
this is the same attitude that led to the Moonlight La La Land controversy. Just whatever, you know. Whatever Warren Beatty said, that's
that portion back up. I mean, we used to get so many, and now people say things like, "Yeah, I'm gonna vote." I'm like, "Well, voting's over, dumbass."
Yeah,
you know.
So this, I mean, last ditch attempt. The How Dare You Awards is
they honor the biggest waste of valuable production dollars in Hollywood for the past year, and you can go to the How Dare You Awards.com, and there's a link. Just copy and paste it, put it in your browser, and it'll take you to the votes, and you can vote on the How Dare You Awards.
And this is a good year to be talking about waste of production dollars.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, you know, there were plenty of movies that would not have been normally nominated because
they're not movies.
Exactly. So we had normally it's like it has to be released in theaters, but we had to abolish that rule for this year, obviously, otherwise we would not have had nominations. And for instance, I got a very angry letter from Kristen Fogel, who said, "Hey, wait a second.
Is there any other kind of letter from Kristen Fogel?"
There's never any kind of other letter from Kristen Fogel, but she was very upset that Onward got a Biggest Disappointment nomination.
Who?
Onward from Pixar.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
And I said, look, I'm sorry. It might not have got a nomination if we had 250 movies to choose from, but we didn't. And it's a great movie in the last 10 minutes, but the other, you know, hour and 20 to 30 minutes is whatever.
I don't want to, I don't want to, you know, talk up Michael's mistresses, but I gotta say that Lady Chu on the How Dare You podcast is a source of constant delight for me.
Delight, right?
And as soon as you mentioned the Onward controversy, I immediately thought of her saying, Cars is a good movie, and being completely oblivious to the idea that it might not be.
Thank you.
And it really, and I'm not just saying this because, you know, Mike's on the show and we do a podcast together, but, you know, a perspective, I'm all for perspectives not often heard in mainstream media. And one of them for me is just like hearing what Lady Chu thinks about films from from a lay perspective. And I mean that in the nicest possible way.
Yes.
We, you know, on the Everything Sequel podcast, we talk from a fairly informed position. You know, as two lifelong devoted movie lovers. Chu is not that, but she's something other and brilliant.
And great.
And anything else that you want to plug?
No, I think that's enough.
Yeah.
I'll just say these are your.
You've appeared on the. You've appeared on the.
You have 0. Do you understand?
Oh, now you're Baccarat shaming me.
These are my.
I thought this was cool.
Natural 9. This is not weird, by the way.
I thought this was cool because the queen kind of looks like a 0, and that queen kind of looks like a 0, and then I feel 7, and I'll stop below 7. Okay, that's my level of card play. I was trying to way to shame me.
Throughout the novel,
these books.
Throughout the novel, I brought out the cards and I kept dealing to myself.
Oh, you did when you were reading?
Yeah.
So you played out the Baccarat game in the book.
Every once in a while. I have a 6. You have a 1. You would definitely draw.
Tell me. Yeah, it's nonsense, meaningless. Tell me. Did you find, knowing the rules of Baccarat, because one of the big criticisms of the Daniel Craig movies I'm just going to plug another great James Bond podcast, which doesn't exist anymore. For my purposes, because it's so fucking good. James Bonding with Matt Gawley and Matt Myra. And Matt Myra, who is also a bit of a...
I know both those people, so I would be interested in that podcast.
It's a great podcast. And they don't seem to be making any more of it, so go and listen to it. His big criticism, Matt Myra's big criticism of the Casino Royale movie was that it's a complete stroke of luck. There's no skill involved in Daniel Craig's James Bond's win in that instance of playing Texas Hold'em.
In that instance of Texas Hold'em, it's the most improbable hand of cards between a bunch of people that you're ever gonna see. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
so what about in the book? What does it seem like Bond? Because I got to tell you, in Moonraker, he just cheats. His solution to beating Hugo Drax, he cheats. Drax is cheating, so it's kind of okay. But
right. That's like the Sting. What was I supposed to do? Accuse him of steal or of cheating better than me?
And then Drax goes, "You're a cheat," and he's like, "No, you can't be doing that because you're a cheat. Because I out-cheated you." But with this, as someone who doesn't understand Baccarat, still doesn't understand Baccarat, it does feel like he really rolled the dice, especially after Felix Leiter gave.
Well, and that's the thing, I guess. So, as an American, I understand. Poker is not a game of luck; it is a skill game. Because there is, reading into your opponents, and for me, Baccarat does seem a bit more based on luck.
Well, Fleming says that in the book, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Bond takes a huge risk, and on that last, when he's betting 32 millions, and his first two cards give him 0, you're pretty good and screwed at that moment. And so when the card comes over and it's a 9, but his 2 whole cards are still down, so Le Chiffre is not seeing that. Le Chiffre just sees a 9, and he's not going to assume that Bond has only has 0 points at that point.
Awesome.
So he.
Come on, guys.
Yeah, maybe I should shut up.
No. I'm loving. This is my favorite part of the whole show.
All I'm saying is, from a strategic standpoint, at that point, Le Chiffre believes there is nothing he can do to lose. I can't remember in the book. He probably has a 6 or a 7 or whatever he has. And, you know, Bond gets to Riley, put over his other 2 cards. And I can't remember. I think maybe they were both face cards because face cards are for 0. And that means he has a 9. And 9 is what you want. There you go. So, and I thought that was I thought that was pretty delicious and like I think I alluded to earlier, brilliantly written. That did have tension for me, but it does seem more based on just blind luck.
Yeah, and with the roulette stuff, because Bond watches them play roulette.
Yeah, there was a lot of give and play to roulette and systems and.
How is that not cheating? What he's doing? Shouldn't he be escorted from the casino like Jeffrey Wright's Felix Leiter's? Like, you can't just watch the fucking roulette all day. Go.
I don't think it's the same as blackjack or even Baccarat. Like, you know, if you can count cards, I don't think it's on that level. I think you can play whatever numbers you want, and if you have a system, you have a system. I don't think it's equated to say counting cards.
Okay, should be. Hey, casinos, save yourself some money. Like, if people have been standing by roulette too long, move them along.
You heard Tom. Tom is advocating for the breaking of more thumbs.
Give them the Don Rickles cattle prod from Casino. I don't think it's Don Rickles who does that, is it?
I don't remember if it's Don Rickles that does that. But
I think I've conflated those two.
Yeah.
It's in my mind.
Different bowl.
I thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Like, I'm on empty.
Me too. And I've got 3 shakers. 3 small shakers. These are the size of the shakers.
Oh,
I'm not going anywhere. Okay, so you can all get off your high horses.
I'm an American. This is how big
eat
my
some
shaker.
spaghetti and go to bed. That's all I'm gonna do. No, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and
for me too.
Yeah, see you on the next one. Not of this, unless you want to keep going. I'm fucking happy for that. But
I would suggest you have a different guest every week, but I'm ready.
Yeah, probably. Probably should get a woman for this one. Well, the bitch is dead. So let's.
For you too.
Sorry?
I dressed up for you too. I went as Bond as I could.
I like it. Yeah. No, I really appreciate the black. I didn't. You know what? This is what a pro Michael Shantz is. He heard James Bond book club, not James Blonde. That's Daniel Craig. James Bond book club, and I didn't even say dress code black tie. And look what we got. And
I've got this. I've got my pictures. I've got a spoon. What more could you ask for?
And we got the kinds of card playing insights that is like in several ways having Telly Savalas as my first guest.
You got a 6. I got a 1.
There you go. 7. 007.
You're gonna stay.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.
As I said, stick around to hear what you thought of the book. And I'm going to give a digestif version of Casino Royale that last less than 60 seconds. So stick around.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Let's see what you said about the book on social media. Tim West is a fellow San Diego theater artist who I've had the privilege of working for before and played multiple roles, including M, in a stage reading of a James Bond TV miniseries I wrote based on the Ian Fleming Bond novels. He's also a major donor to the Teresa de Vincenzo Memorial Library, and so it really wouldn't have been possible to do the James Bond Book Club without his generous, thoughtful gifts. On Facebook, Tim says, in the US, it's known as McRoyale with cheese, and adds, I think a first in a franchise is interesting when it doesn't know it's a franchise. Imagine if the Third Man had spin-offs. Well, we've certainly spoken to that issue, Tim, and hopefully maybe not more clarity on that issue, but at least some understanding of how it may or may not have been the first in a series. Not necessarily was about a specific as we were willing to get. Certainly speaks to how prosaic and functional some of the character introductions in the book are. There's no sense of a long game of it becoming a franchise. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for if you don't like reading, or don't like reading Ian Fleming, or don't like reading James Bond books. It's the digestif of Casino Royale. James Bond was on his 139th cigarette of the morning. Baccarat is a game with lots of rules, and here's absolutely all of them so you can sort of follow what's going on. Bond never much cared for women, but once he named a cocktail after one, he started to see the appeal. Here's the recipe in case you want to die of alcohol poisoning in your own home. Le Chiffre was disabled, communist, and a bit of a paedophile. A real first draft delete as appropriate villain. Vesper portrayed Bond, just to confirm your suspicions that even your favorite woman is secretly working against you with the worst people in the world. Bond vowed to crush Smersh, even though they were the only reason he still had a pair of working balls. The bitch is dead now is a final sentence that makes it hard to justify liking this book in 2021. Seriously, that's like the last words of the whole novel. It's not exactly God blesses everyone. Comment, subscribe, review on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram via Lonesome Whistle Productions. The James Bond Book Club will return in The Spy Who Loved Me on June 15th. I believe it's a Tuesday.